Yep. So hey guys, everyone, good evening. Thanks for joining in. So we are here for the second episode of Ask the Monk series. So basically, the series was created to talk with leaders, engage with leaders in the talent acquisition space. We are glad to have Anshuman here. So this first series for next 3 months is basically towards technology, trying to understand different technical roles and persona, which will help technology recruiters, right? So I welcome everyone who is part of this call. I think I see there are 24, 25 participants here, right? And we thanks our sponsors, Zobin. Zobin is our interviewing platform, so we thank them. And here we have our monk for our next episode to understand the candidate persona, backend developer persona. This is Anshuman Singh. I think people who've been fairly on the online would be knowing Anshuman. He's very, very active on LinkedIn. He keeps writing some amazing content on recruitment, and he's been an entrepreneur himself. He started his journey with, I think, DirectEye, and then he was with Facebook for a while. He was part of the messenger team, the chat messenger team, which was building the chat platform. And then he ended up founding a HR tech platform, InterviewBit. I think most of the recruiters would be aware of InterviewBit, which is an assessment platform. And then the next company which he founded was really amazing one, the Scalar Academy. And I'm a big fan of the company, which helps a lot of young developers, right, shape their fundamentals, their OOPS data structures, algorithms, and help them get placed in good product companies, right? So Anshuman is someone who is well aware of the HR tech domain, the HR industry, because he's been there for last 6 years. So I welcome Anshuman to be part of this discussion. So welcome you for the second episode. Yep, it's happy we were glad to have you here.
Thank you, Ashfaq. Thank you so much for the generous introduction. Glad to be here, everybody. Maybe a few things that Ashfaq hasn't mentioned. I am a techie by profession. I started as a software engineer, and later on, in my entrepreneur journey, I did almost everything. I have done sales, I've done recruitment, I've gotten my hands dirty. I got to work very closely with Mark Zuckerberg when I was with Facebook. So learned a bunch of things from there. I learned a bunch of business principles from there. And when I was with InterviewBit, when I was running InterviewBit and now Scalar, it's during those phases that I actually, to be honest, I learned a lot more about recruitment than I did about tech. So you can assume that I've done 4 years of degree in tech, and then maybe another 5 years of degree in recruitment, doing things on the ground, seeing what works versus what doesn't work. So very, very happy to be here. Happy to help out in any way possible, and in fact, like, I hope to learn a lot apart from contributing from my side, my learnings from my experience.
Awesome. So yep. So you're one of those rare folks who come with that exact blend which is required in the digital era, right? So you come from the technology background. You have that foundation where you worked with companies like Facebook and work closely with Zuckerberg, right? And then you've been in the recruitment industry for like close to 6 years now, right? So that is a pretty good blend to have at this particular era, right? Because totally everything is getting digitalized. So my first discussion, the first question which I want to start with is around this. So how do you see the recruiting industry and correspondingly the recruiter roles evolving in this digital era? We see that there's a lot of talks about AI, a lot of talks about chatbots, right? So the recruiting industry is evolving, and that too during this COVID scenes, people are adopting digitization, right? People are moving towards more being digital. So during this period, how do you see the recruiting industry evolve, and also in line, how do you think the recruiter roles will evolve over a period of time?
Right. Actually, to be honest, recruitment as a function, I don't believe AI ML is going to replace it. It's only going to augment it. Let me elaborate a little, right? So in general, if you look at hiring happens in two forms. Places where hiring happens in bulk, and these are typically your blue collar jobs. And then there is selective hiring where you want a very specific set of skill set, and those are your white collar jobs. And then as again, like, you go up the layer, the selectiveness of the profile becomes higher and higher, and that is why companies, for example, there would be the Michael Pages of the world, etc., that would go and fetch those talent for you, and like people are willing to pay very good amount of money for you to be able to find that talent, right? Now, to be honest, I believe like recruitment is a function of following things. One is being understanding business really well, and therefore importance of a role, and then like being able to understand what kind of a person might do justice to this role. That for an AI ML system to be able to do requires a lot of data. I mean, so usually the way AI ML works is that you train the system on a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of data, a lot of data, and then it starts to see pattern, and then it starts to use those patterns. Fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have that level of information available. You don't have the attribute information of a person available, that hey, look, this person is actually very good with leadership, by the way, this is again a very great attribute in this person, etc., etc., and therefore this person is fit for the role. That doesn't exist. So doing or applying AI ML to matching, finding the right, I mean, the aspect of head hunting, that's an incredibly hard problem to solve. I know that there have been a bunch of companies in this space, but none of those companies have been able to solve this problem to a decent degree. The second part of recruitment is actually, if you're going after selective hiring, then being able to build those relations where the person is responsive to you, is happy sharing their concerns, etc., with you, and like then they go through the process. They trust you for a major life decision, which is what career path to choose. That again is very hard for a machine to replicate. So think of AI ML, or in fact all of tech, as a tool. So all of future recruiters would heavily use tools, tech driven tools, to be better at their job. But nobody can replace you. I mean, very similar to, I say the same thing about software engineering. Nobody can replace software engineers. Nobody can replace recruiters either. They Tech or AI ML can only help you become better. For example, there are these assessment tools that would tell you who to focus on if you are hiring a techie, right? So they would, for example, filter out people who might not be great fit for this. Very similarly, like platforms like LinkedIn, Naukri, which are all digital tools, right? Like digital platforms, they help finding somebody easier. But again, like the hard work of actually what really to find, and like how to find that is still has to be done by a recruiter. So best recruiters in the future are people who would be well versed with these tools. They would know what is happening in the ecosystem. They would be quick to adapt, um, and and uh, and they are above all people person.
Okay.
People love to share and like love to trust.
So since there is some bit of an automation, so as you're trying to say recruiters need to buddy up with technology, right? So it's not like technology is going to take away the jobs of recruiters, right? Recruiters need to be better equipped so that they can buddy up with technology and deliver. So now, in this era where we need to know how to buddy up with technology, what are the skills do you think will evolve, right, in terms of recruiter knowing how to buddy up, right? So what are kind of skills, right? Because if you must be knowing the kind of a recruitment life cycle which is there. We have JD construction to sourcing, and then candidate engagement, and then the entire cycle of managing the interview and then offer, right? So this is the entire recruitment life cycle. So there are skills, different kind of skills required here, like JD understanding, the search part of it, and then the engagement part of it. So now here, where do you see what kind of skills recruiters need to have in this digital space?
Right. I think like again breaking it down. So you said like JD understanding. That boils down to understanding the domain really really well, right? Like as I said, like understanding the business and the corresponding terms really well. Understanding what they mean to the core. For example, when I say that, hey, look, I want to hire a person for international expansion, what does that mean? What should the person know beforehand? How do I go about assessing those people? Yeah, so when I say that in terms of tech, when I say that, hey, look, I want to hire a front-end developer who has been working on React, then what exactly is React, and then what exactly is a front-end developer? not really falling back to keyword search or regular expression search, um, which might not yield you always the best result. So that's part one, which is understand your domain really well, right? So domain expertise. Then the second part is how do you engage candidates? I mean, and like how do you filter candidates? So there is a part of filtering, then there is engagement, and then you finally take them through the process, and then they um, hopefully join wherever you want them to join. Um, the filtration part, there has been a lot of there have been a lot of tools that now are in the ecosystem. For tech, there is HackerRank, HackerEarth, InterviewBit as well, and for non-tech again, like Aspiring Minds and Metal and etc. They help you filter folks, and then that tells you who to focus on. So best if you adapt to that. For sourcing, again, like platforms like Naukri, IM Jobs, there is InstaHire, there is AngelList, etc. That can help you find the right kind of talent. If you're looking for a techie, then maybe even looking at GitHub profiles might again help you find the right kind of people who might be just hidden on LinkedIn, or you might not be even looking at their LinkedIn properly. During the engagement, again, tech, to be honest, is not only about coding. There are a bunch of these no-code tools that you can quickly set up and start using to engage the end audience. For example, there are a bunch of these mailing platforms that you can start using to engage and measure your funnel on how what kind of response are you getting from candidates. So if you have a list of email IDs, and let's say you're doing bulk hiring, if you want to engage them, there is SendGrid, there is MailChimp that can help you engage and sort of understand who is where in my funnel by sending them bulk emails and then measuring the response, etc. So all in all, I mean, you start with understanding domain relevance. You start with a lot of people passion, but then all along the journey, at every stage, there are a bunch of these tools that are now famous slash popular that can help you be effective at the role. And there might be certain domain specific tools as well. As I mentioned, for tech, you should look at Stack Overflow, GitHub. You should look at people's CodeChef profiles or CodeForces profile to understand who are the great coders versus not so great coders.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Yep. Okay. Now, one thing which most of the times goes wrong in recruitment, right, which is not really great, is why is that the relationship between the hiring manager and the recruiter is like a Tom and Jerry, right? Is it always the recruiter wrong, or how is it, right? Why the blame is on the recruiter always, and specifically in the technology hiring space, right? Why is that? From your experience, what do you think? Why is it a Tom and Jerry role, and why is that the recruiter gets blamed always? Is it the recruiter goes wrong always, or how is it?
Right. I think it's it's probably wrong to say that it happens always. I've seen um, a lot of happy relationships between the hiring manager and recruiters as well.
It is blamed, right? So that's my point. So is it like always the recruiter who goes wrong, the hiring manager is always right? How is it?
Right, right. So I'll tell you how it is. Right? So basically, recruitment is hard. It's not something unlike a lot of other functions which can probably where you can solve a problem in a day. Recruitment is something that takes time. Finding somebody takes time. Getting them through the process takes time. Even when they do accept the offer, getting them to join takes time because they have a notice period to serve. So hiring is a problem which, to be honest, is uh, you ask any company, any growing company, what is their biggest problem? They'll say hiring. Hiring is a problem which is hard to solve. It is, in fact, like in the principles of company building, all founders are advised to spend the most amount of time hiring the right kind of people. It is one problem statement that takes the most amount of time as well. And to be honest, most companies get it wrong than right. So now, if hiring is the biggest problem in every company, and the if you look at this as a client and service provider relationship, the recruiter is the service provider who's giving you the hiring help. Chances that hiring might not really turn out the way it is supposed to, or hiring might end up taking more time than it was estimated, is very very high. And just like in a typical client service provider relationship, whenever things go wrong, the client blames the service provider. So, so you're just at the end of things, and like you have the visibility of the. I mean, to the rest of the org, it is your responsibility, and that's why you get blamed. That being said, I mean, look, I mean, there are ways in which that could be avoided. Um, One is to a hiring manager. When the hiring manager says that I want to hire engineers, engineers are not typically headcounts for them. Engineers, to them, the job doesn't finish when the engineer is hired, but the job finishes when they actually end up joining and performing really, really well, right? So them actually being a fit in the system, that is when their job ends. Helping them do that, which is being more of a business partner than just like, hey, look, my job was getting you a resource and I've gotten you a resource. That would help. And therefore, I mean, you need to sit with the hiring manager, understand that what has been, let's say, what are the parameters that are working in the current hires, what are the parameters that are not working in the current hires. That is important to do. In fact, you need to push your hiring managers to think in that direction. For example, I'll give you a case. Um, in our case, one of the positions which we struggle to hire on is in Scalar Academy. We have this position of an instructor, people who teach live, and these guys join us full time. And the reason why it is very hard position is because most people that we hire are people who are highly paid software developers from top tech companies, and this role sort of requires them to not do software development anymore, but switch to complete teaching, which a lot of people are not comfortable doing, and not everybody is actually, to be honest, very comfortable teaching either. So one is like finding people is an extremely uphill task, and then when you find people today, I mean, we find that most people are not up to the mark. They can't teach in a fashion where they're extremely like clear to even somebody who's a beginner. So finding this is extremely hard job. And um, I mean, one of the things that has really worked well is like the person who's been working with us internally has been really good at analyzing data. For example, one of the analysis revealed that, by the way, people who are our own alumni, they tend to do a better job teaching than finding random people. Now, when you do things like those, then the problem statement becomes much easier to solve. So help your hiring manager do that, right? Understand where the problem statement is coming, what is the root of the problem statement, and help them see these statistics. That will help, that will actually make your hiring manager feel more confident in you. That will help the hiring manager feel that you are a partner in the problem statement rather than a client and service provider relation where like you are just providing the service and there is a set of guidelines that is given to you to provide the service. People don't hate their teammates. People hate service providers. So you don't want that kind of a relationship with your hiring manager.
Exactly. So what you're trying to say is don't be a service provider to your hiring manager. Try to buddy up with the hiring manager, right? And the most important factor which you are trying to make is have that empathy from the
Right.
business context, right? And try to understand why is the hiring manager trying to fill that role? What is the business context to it, right?
Right.
And once that understanding comes, I think the relationship can get better. You will start empathizing the hiring manager for the kind of a need they have, right? Okay, so a similar question in line to this hiring manager. To what extent do you think recruiters should know tech? Right. Today, a lot of recruiters come from a non-tech background and stuff, right? So, to what extent recruiters should be coming with some kind of a technology understanding, and what is that level, right? To what extent it is?
Right. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about tech recruitment. I mean, if you're
Exactly.
not tech recruitment, then probably you don't need to know tech.
Yeah, the crowd who's here is mostly like tech recruiters, so we are talking about tech. Yeah.
Look, I mean, the extent of tech should be where, I mean, nobody would expect you to write code, but what is expected is that you're able to differentiate between different technologies. You're able to differentiate between which technologies are, for example, subsets of other technologies. And what does a skill proficiency actually imply? Uh, for example, I'll maybe give a certain level of example, and this is, by the way, also important because engineers, techies, they respect recruiters who they can have an actual tech-to-tech conversation with. They respect recruiters who feel like they are their career counselors rather than just somebody who calls them up and says like, "Are you interested in a job and whether you'll apply to this company?" Um, you want that to happen because then you develop relations. For example, I have met a few recruiters where I asked them to go and find somebody who has done some level of shell scripting in the past, uh, and is, let's say, a good backend developer, preferably Java, right? Now, when I say that, people who don't understand what shell scripting is, or people who don't understand like what really backend developer is, what they start to do is they figure out certain keywords, right? So you maybe just one keyword could be Java developer, or core Java or something like that, and they try to find those in the resume. Or I mean, because I just said shell scripting, they would start looking for shell scripting in the resume. Now, the truth is, I mean, if you understand what shell scripting is, you'll understand that anybody who has used at any point of time any Unix-based platform, any Linux-based platform in the past, has worked with Linux in the past, or anybody who has been a decent backend developer at a company like Flipkart or Swiggy or Amazon, etc. in the past, would have done shell scripting. So you don't really need to look for that in the resume. Uh, that, however, will come if you understand what really shell scripting means. And very similarly, for example, when I say that, hey, look, I mean, I want somebody who's a great front-end developer, should have very deep understanding of JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, if you start looking for JavaScript in resumes, you'll find that every single person has written JavaScript in their resume. So that doesn't help you filter. But like, there are again like certain terms. For example, people who are great JavaScript developers, they would understand what prototypal inheritance is,
Mm-hmm.
or let's say, I mean, to them it wouldn't matter whether they are React developers or Angular developers. They can switch between those two fairly easily. You ask them to implement a particular library. For example, there is a concept of promises in JavaScript, which again you don't need to know.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask them that, hey, can you write code in JavaScript to implement promises? They could write that. I mean, somebody who understands JavaScript really well will be able to write that out. So those are important from two perspectives. One is it helps you find the right kind of person. Two is it helps you have very intelligent conversation with with a candidate, where the candidate then respects you because the candidate feels that this person knows their stuff, and then is not just helping or like sort of filtering on resume keywords. So important to understand your domain. And by the way, this is not just only true for tech. This is true for a lot of business, sales, marketing roles as well. If you understand the business problem statement, if you see what kind of work they've done in the past, by the way, how do they fit here? That really helps.
Yep. So one point which you were making with the first example, right, wherein you said a Java developer with shell scripting. So then what happens is when that kind of a job description recruiters get, they end up mentioning the word shell scripting as well in the search, and that becomes a showstopper.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, people were using Unix, Linux, right? They would have done some kind of a scripting, some kind of an automation and stuff, right? Then that comes by default. It's like a cherry on top skill. For example, for recruiters, recruiters work with trackers, Excel sheets by
Right.
default, day in, day out, irrespective of whatever good ATS is out there. Everyone uses tracker at the end of the day. But you cannot find the word tracker on a resume of a recruiter, even though the recruiter works on it, right? Uses it day in, day out, right? That's a cherry on top skill for a recruiter's role. Similarly, as you rightly mentioned, understanding the persona of a backend developer is important. What is the cherry on top skill for a backend developer?
Right.
So like many a times like build tools, generally 4 years, 5 years experience developers work on build tools, right? So just because a JD says build tools, it doesn't mean it becomes mandatory that they should have written build tool on that. So yeah, persona understanding becomes crucial in this particular segment, right? Okay, so the next question in line to this developer role, right? The developer role has evolved over a period of time. Right? Previously, it was just a developer. There was not even front end. There was not even back end, right? And then over a period of time, it evolved. And then we were hearing this term just front end and back end. These are the only two terms which we were hearing. And from back end, now it is like platform engineer, back end engineer. Now there is data engineer. Now, what are these terms? This sometimes freaks out a recruiter, right? So, can you help us get some clarity around what are these terms? What kind of roles these people do generally?
Sure. Actually, let me take some other example which everybody will be able to correlate with, and then I can probably draw correlations with tech. So imagine I'm building a car. Let's say I'm building this Maruti Swift car. Um, what the exterior of the car would look like, where the headlights would go, what color would the car be, what kind of design should be there on the Maruti Swift, etc. That is the job of in what you would call in your tech as front end developer. I mean, imagine there's a front end engineer who is working on this kind of a thing where they make sure that the interface that you see to interact with the website, for example, when you go on Facebook, what kind of color schemes do you see, what kind of blocks and like what kind of modules, etc., that you see inside the website, that is decided by a front end developer. And then how does that interact with you? For example, um, um, when you say that turn on the lights in car, then what color are the lights? Do you have halogen bulbs or do you have normal yellow bulbs? All of that. That is again the job of a front end developer, right? Now, but when you say that, hey, let's turn on the ignition engine, what really happens inside? Because all you have done is you have just taken a key, inserted the key, and then you've turned the key. What happens inside to make sure that the car engine starts to run, and therefore when you press the pedal, the car moves forward? That all machinery that is all happening inside, which is not visible to you, which is all behind the hood, is taken care of by a backend engineer. Backend engineers write code or deal with systems that you probably don't see ever, but they make sure that your site is running. For example, when you go on facebook.com and you add a friend, then all of the functioning where like this gets registered with Facebook that you've added a friend, plus this other friend also gets a friend request, and they can visit your profile and see like what all have you done. All of this is happening behind the hood. There is somebody who's writing the logic, business logic for what should an ad friend do. All of that is being done by a backend developer. But that add friend button, what should happen to the button once clicked, etc. All of that is the responsibility of a front end developer. So that is on a very high level the differentiation between front end and back end. Within backend, however, I mean, because I mean, I just said backend under the hood, but like inside the car, there are so many different kind of things. Right? There's an engine, there are brakes, there are headlights, and so many different moving parts that like even I don't know what all is happening. So there as well, I mean, you will have different kind of expertise of people, right? For example, somebody might be an expert in engines. They just make engines better, right? Somebody might be an expert in brakes, etc. Very similarly in backend engineers as well, there are different kind of um, expertise. Very similarly, like how I write that code or how I implement my engines could be built on different kind of technologies. Uh, very similarly in programming, you have different kind of languages. I could be building the same backend in Java, somebody else could be building it in Ruby, somebody else could be building it in Python. These are just different tools to or different technologies to sort of use to build things. Within backend, I mean, because backend is a huge canopy term, there are various kind of specializations. For example, there are these platform engineers who help write code which encapsulates your business logic. For example, what should happen when I click on add friend? That is a business logic. Or for example, if let's say I'm working in media.net, media.net is an ad serving platform, which is, let's say you go on yahoo.com, then when you're searching something, what kind of ads should you see? That basically is decided by media.net, right? So again, depending on the search term, what ads to show you, that business logic is again written by a platform engineer. Um, at the same time, there are people who are even a layer below, which is to be able to take the decision of what ad to show. I need a lot of data points. For example, when somebody writes Roger Federer, then what exactly is Roger Federer? Is that a person? Is that a flower? Is that let's say name of a city? Is what exactly is that, right? So being able to do that, all of that requires a lot of data. Where I would have a list of a lot of terms, and then I would have the corresponding categorization of what category this thing belongs in. Uh, that data, handling a lot of those data points, being able to quickly look up something, that is handled by a data engineer. Data engineers again like looks or like sounds very very simple when I say that, like just finding out what category. But like data engineers are people who handle. Uh, I mean, my typical laptop is 1 terabyte. These are people who handle petabytes of information. Petabyte is like the amount of data that would not fit even in thousands of laptops. So they are people who handle data that would take so many different machines to store, and across those they then make sure that there are the right pipelines or the right ways to query the data, right? For example, even if Facebook has petabytes of data, when I ask give me, or like when Ashfaq goes to facebook.com, very quickly it finds out where Ashfaq is in all of that data, figures out what news feed to show to Ashfaq, and then that actually shows up on the web page, right? So structuring all of this data and dealing with a lot of this data is done by data engineers. Data engineers also write these jobs to figure out different kind of statistics. For example, what kind of users are really active on Facebook, or for example, what kind of users post very often, and therefore maybe we should do something for these kind of users. Fetching a lot of these information by running jobs is also done by data engineers. And data engineers are basically the machinery which helps a lot of other analytics functions, right? For example, you'll have data scientists or data analysts. These guys rely on data engineers doing their job. If they don't, then these guys will be ineffective. The
Yep.
data is being lost or not being stored properly.
Mhm.
So um, I mean, in the car relation, uh, when you turn your key, what should happen in the background? That is your platform engineer, the engineer who's deciding that. But at the same time, maintaining data of how many miles has your car run, when is it due for your next uh, visit to the for servicing, etc. And then like maintaining a lot of those data points, that is done by a data engineer.
Okay. And how about a backend engineer?
Backend is like
A general term. It's a general term within that.
wider term for everybody who works behind the hood, right? So backend, a lot of people are called backend engineers. I mean, it's a very generic term. Usually, most backend engineers are generic backend engineers, which means like you hire a random person who today might be building, let's say, something like Amazon Alexa for the Amazon team in the backend team, and you today I hire them and then I ask them to build an edtech platform. They're usually not very domain sensitive. They can switch over and then they can start building that.
Okay. So let's say, for example, if someone who has been a data engineer, okay, uh, is it good to place this guy or maybe put this guy for a role of a platform engineer?
So they would have a learning curve. So look, I mean base the base that you should be great at coding and you should be able to understand systems, that is there with all kinds of backend developers, including your platform and data engineers. But the thing is, like a data engineer would find it very difficult to switch to to switch to a domain where they are only writing business logic. Very similarly, the other way around as well. A platform engineer would find, or like will find some amount of learning curve to understand how data engineering works. How do I model this data and make sure that I create these data pipelines, etc., so that the right kind of data is stored at the right place. Uh, that being said, I mean, again, as I said, like most backend developers are very generic in nature. So a lot of companies are actually open. For example, you'll find that Amazon or Microsoft, they don't say that I want to hire a specific data engineer, but they rather say that I want to hire a backend developer. And as long as people go through my interview process, I'm happy having them work as data engineers as well. So a lot of companies are generic in that sense. That being said, I mean, data engineers would do better as data engineers in different companies. For example, if somebody who's been working on Spark would find it comfortable to move to another company and then just go and build data pipelines there and work on Spark. Um, Somebody who's a platform engineer would again be more comfortable as in a platform kind of a role or a feature development role. Would find it harder to switch to a data engineering role.
Awesome, awesome. Amazing points here. The point here which you've tried making here is most of the companies hire a generic backend developers, and then probably they can decide whether they want to be data engineers or platform engineers, right? So having said that, this is a very crucial information for a lot of recruiters because if they get a role which says platform engineer, then what recruiters do is they look for people who call themselves exactly platform engineers, which may not happen, right? Because most of the people, that generic designation is backend, right? And they might be doing a platform engineer role. Their KRA could be platform engineer, but then they don't use the word platform engineer. Similarly, the same case with data engineers, right? So in these cases, how do you tell a recruiter what to look for? Let's say if you're hiring, if you're a company who is specifically hiring for platform engineer, specifically for data engineer, how would you tell a recruiter, hey, look, just don't go by designation, right? Don't expect a guy to write platform engineer, don't expect a guy to write data engineer. So what else will you tell a recruiter to look for in these cases?
I think like on a very high level, if I look at the job title segregation, the following are the segregations in tech. You have people in terms of skill function. I mean, you have people who are mobile developers, or you have people who are front-end developers. Developers are people who develop your apps. Front-end developers, as I said, like like the exterior of the car. That is the equivalence of a front-end developer in tech. They build the exterior of a website. How should your website function? You have then backend developer, um, and backend developers are also of two kinds, to be honest. One one are backend developers who also certain times call themselves as product engineers, are people who like building features. They like building features, they like rolling out features, and they like seeing the impact. Whereas there is a second type of backend engineer who likes working on scale, which is I currently have 1,000 users. If I go to 1 million users, what should I do so that things don't break? Things keep scaling. They keep working.
Is that the data engineer role?
That's not really the data engineering role. Data engineering role is a role that where they work a lot with storing information. I mean, data in the tech context is like, for example, all recruiters here are very well versed with working with sheets, right? Excel sheets.
Yeah.
Uh, Everything in tech is also stored almost as an Excel sheet. And the term there is called a table. Uh, Very similar, and the collection of tables is called a database. And when you are dealing with like terabytes and petabytes of data, then like you have what you call as database clusters. Data engineers are supposed to maintain these data clusters. So think of them as people who are maintaining millions and millions of Excel sheets somewhere. And when you tell them that, hey, give me this information, they're able to query that Excel sheet to find out where this information is, and they're able to fetch that and give it to you very quickly. Um, so data engineers are like one variety of backend engineers, but I wouldn't say that like a data engineer would be very wary of shifting to a product engineering role or a backend engineering, any generic backend engineering role, and vice versa. I mean, most people consider themselves as generic. For example, in my own role at Facebook, I was a data engineer for 6 months. I was a product engineer for 12 months. I was a person focusing on reliability and latency for 2 years. I was almost uh, I mean, and then I mean, I spent most of my years leading products and like mostly doing engineering management. But in IC roles, like the major segregation is in mobile development, front end development, and back end development. Back end development is a wide category. Unless the employer says that I'm very specific about a particular skill set, it's fair to assume that backend engineers are fairly generic. They'll be able to shift across. And then there are testing roles where you have automation engineers who write automation scripts. You have QA engineers who do manual testing. They might not fit as backend engineers and vice versa. But on a very high level, you have mobile developers, front-end developers, backend engineers, QA slash SDET, who are your test engineers. You have DevOps, folks who maintain your systems and machines, who again will not be able to switch to a backend role. But like these are high level different roles, but like a backend engineer is fairly generic in most companies. Is required to sort of shift across here and there.
Okay, awesome. So you were making a point about the differences between platform engineer, the data engineer and stuff, right? And you were saying if the company is very specific, then you can look for it, but otherwise general backend engineers can adapt to any of these roles, right? So So in this case, I think, don't you think there's a gap somewhere in the job description? Because when you pick up a job description, the job descriptions mainly talk about skills, right? They don't talk about KRA. Then aren't they misguiding the recruiters in a manner, right? Because they are telling recruiters, okay, experience with Spark Scala 3 years, this with 2 years, right? And the recruiter is like, okay, let me put this and ask the candidate, okay, have you worked? There's not much clear definition of the KRA. When there's not much definition, because the roles, as you mentioned, from what I heard from you, prompt engineer, data engineer, these kind of roles need good amount of understanding of the KRA, what exactly this guy will do. Once I know this, I'll be able to validate that. It's not just about the skill, someone knows Scala or Hadoop or something, right? So don't you think there's a lot of gap there, because I have not seen amazing job descriptions, right? Maybe there can be 5% or 2% people who write it, but otherwise the job descriptions, don't you think there's a gap there that is somewhere misguiding the recruiters?
Right. So actually, you're right. There is a gap, and that is where I think it's important to talk to the hiring managers to understand it really well. Look, I mean, to be honest, companies also fall in various categories. Like most early stage companies, or mid stage growing companies, are actually very particular about the skill stack or tech stack, because they don't want to invest in you taking time to learn. So they want people who come and join the company and they start running from day one. So they want people who are ready made. They are already doing what they are supposed to come and do here. So there I can understand why there is, let's say, uh, love for finding somebody who's doing exactly what I want them to do. And therefore, when I am hiring a data engineer, please get me a data engineer. I'll pay more for that data engineer. That's fine. Most bigger companies, however, are, like, at least in my experience of working with uh, now more than 750 of them, uh, are very open when it comes to the definition of a backend engineer or a data engineer, as long as people are great with problem solving skills. Because to them, they don't really require the person to come and start writing or being effective right from day one. They're okay with them taking time to learn and upskill themselves, as long as they see potential in this person being a great developer. That being said, even then, if you look through the JDs of these companies as well, it states the same kind of skills as, let's say, an early stage company would state. So it is very important, therefore, to understand from the hiring manager what they are looking at. And one of the best ways to do that is ask them what their interview process is going to look like, which is what are they exactly going to test in the interview process. For example, in Amazon, does not test whether you know about Apache Spark or not. Uh, they would just ask you DS algo questions. They would ask you design questions, which are the same for all kind of generic backend developers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, okay, cool, awesome. Okay, okay. Let's say, for example, in this era, if there are top two, three skills which a recruiter, technology recruiter to be specific, needs to have, what, according to you, are the top two or three skills which a tech recruiter needs to have, according to you?
Right. Um, I mean, to be honest, what I believe is all skills can be learned. The few things that, or few attributes that I believe are very important, and I have seen them to have very high correlation with success as a recruiter, is one, being proactive and being process oriented. What I mean by that is, a big portion of a recruiter's job is to follow up at the right times, keep communicating heavily, and not assume anything. uh, because you lose out on most people just because your process was delayed. So being able to do that very proactively, being able to push your hiring managers very proactively, that is very important. But I believe your question was not on the softer skill aspect. Your question was more on what should they know from a
Yes.
hard skill standpoint. Um, from a hard skill standpoint, I believe, again, this, I mean, I've said this multiple times now. One is domain knowledge is important. You should understand, if you're hiring in tech, you should understand at least the terminologies in tech. And then you should spend some time understanding those terminologies. It's okay to not be able to write code, but you should be able to understand what a particular tech does. And then therefore, I mean, the basic litmus test is, can you actually hold a conversation with a senior candidate for 15 to 20 minutes where they're talking about tech? Do they feel comfortable discussing tech with you? So that's one. It's important because of one, it helps you find the right people. It's important because it helps you build the right kind of relations. That's one. Two, I believe understanding of, I mean, a big portion of recruitment is headhunting slash sourcing. So understanding of all common sourcing platforms like your Naukri, LinkedIn, IM Jobs, or doing maybe X-ray search to figure out like people across various platforms. That's, I would say, is the second item on the list. Source, you should be good at sourcing. You should be very passionate about sourcing, finding the right people. And once you find them, you need to make sure they stay your candidate forever, which means if you have found a person and you've helped them make a career transition, you need to build the kind of relations where they keep coming back to you. They rely on you for all of their future jobs. That is very important. In fact, like a lot of you will maybe in a year or two from now start doing leadership recruitment. That is the path to do leadership recruitment. You have build a lot of relations, and then that becomes your user base. In the case of InterviewBit, we had our website as the user base that was helping us build those relationships. So that's two. And three is, I mean, just being a little tech savvy to understand what tools can you use to help you save bandwidth, which is, for example, just get to know a little bit of mailing tools, etc. Get to understand how to build. For example, there are these things called drip campaigns in marketing, where you can send you can schedule a sequence of emails to be sent to a candidate that you want to activate in case they are not responding, which again, if written well, if designed well, can help you open up candidates even without you having to call them. These are mails that get triggered automatically. So again, good understanding of uh, mailing systems, email systems, mail drip campaigns, etc. will help you a lot. It will help you free up a lot of your bandwidth.
Awesome, awesome. So these pointers which you made, I think the first two recruiters would have heard a lot. Okay, the third one, I think I'll add it. The term probably solutions, right? Recruiters need to be looking for technology solutions, like the way we started the conversation, budding up with tech. Not just a mailing system; it can be anything else. So as a recruiter, how are you tech savvy or maybe solution savvy, if not tech savvy, if you have to put it that way, right? Today we know, okay, if not WhatsApp, we know it's Signal or maybe Telegram. That's a solution which we have in our mind, right? How else we can chat with someone. Similarly, in our recruiting activities, I think recruiters need to figure out what are the solutions which they can look forward to minimize their entire recruiting load, right? The entire recruiting life cycle where they can automate or maybe minimize, right? So I think that's a pretty amazing point. Recruiters would be hearing the first 2 points pretty often, but the third one is something which is recruiters need to look into, right? Okay, so one last question from my end is like this. It's a hypothetical question. Okay, assume that still you're working in Facebook. You're not part of your entrepreneurial journey, right? And a recruiter reaches out to you for a job opportunity. What kind of an information or story would entice you and maybe look forward for that opportunity recruiter is presenting?
I think just the context on why that opportunity is really suitable for me. So when I mean, look, everybody can tell which message is a generic message versus what is a personalized message. If you're going after high value candidates, you have to make sure your message is very personalized. For example, let's say when I was working for Facebook Messenger, and if somebody would have reached out to me saying that, hey, look, I've seen your work, you've worked on these kind of scales at Facebook Messenger. By the way, we are seeing very similar kind of scales at WhatsApp, and it's growing faster. Would you like to come and work at WhatsApp? I would have been interested in that message. Maybe I would still not have joined WhatsApp, but I would have been interested, or like I would have wanted to respond to that message because somebody took the effort of studying my profile and then sent me a personal message, which I know that like it took effort, and this was not just a mass email sent to everybody. So being human in the reach out helps.
Awesome, awesome. Being human, because it's not the Java developer, right? So as recruiters, we have this, yeah, Java developer hai wahan pe, right? There's a Java developer out there. So there's someone who's a human, there's someone who has a feeling and empathy. So as you mentioned, if someone can take a bit of time and then read through that message and read through the profile of the candidate and then craft a message accordingly, maybe personalize it, then I think that would entice the candidates to reward, right? Okay, cool. So thanks, Anshuman. Thanks for being a part of this. I think we had some good takeaways. We had some good clarity in terms of the backend role. How is there in terms of the platform engineer, the data engineer, the different kinds of role, and what are the kind of KRAs. I believe this would have helped a lot of recruiters who are part of this, right? And also recruiters will tune in to listen to this later, right, on our YouTube channels, and then I'm sure it will be helpful. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for giving your time, right? It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Ashfaq. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, everybody else, for attending this session. I hope this was helpful.
Yep, thank you. Yep. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you. Thank you.